Bill Maher thought he could throw a subtle jab and move on, but Jasmine Crockett's calm, devastating response turned the entire room and the internet upside down. The dressing room at CBS Television City in Los Angeles was cold. Not physically cold, but distant, like a space that had been polished so many times it forgot people had to sit in it. Jasmine Crockett sat still, elbows on the armrest, her phone screen dimming in her palm. A young assistant had just walked out, politely reminding her she had 10 minutes before she was on real time with Bill Maher. She took a breath, not to calm nerves. This wasn't her first time on national TV, but something about this one felt off. Maybe it was the call she'd gotten 2 days ago from her comms director, who said the tone of the invitation felt loaded. They're calling it a discussion on polarization and civility, her comms director had warned. But if Maher goes where I think he might, they're going to bait you. Just be ready. Jasmine hadn't answered right away. She was used to panels that started with handshakes and ended with smirks. This wasn't new. What was new was the silence when she arrived. No one asked if she needed water. No one introduced her to the other guest. She could hear muffled voices from the hallway, laughs that stopped when she stepped into the green room earlier. She didn't need confirmation. She had it already. Her assistant, Reese, leaned through the door. 2 minutes. Jasmine stood, adjusted her blazer, powder blue, clean lines, no flash, and looked at herself in the mirror. No cracks, no room for them. Not here. As they walked toward the set, she passed the familiar wall of black and white portraits, the so-called icons, men in suits, men with opinions, men who had never had to measure their tone for fear of being called angry on cable TV. When she reached the stage, she gave Bill Maher a polite smile. He nodded, just barely, and gestured toward her seat like he was holding back a joke only he got. The lights came up. The applause sign blinked. The theme song played, and just like that, they were live. Maher leaned in, half grinning. Our next guest is a rising Democratic Congresswoman from Texas. She's young, sharp, and possibly the future of the party, unless emotion gets in the way. The audience chuckled, just a bit. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but calculation. She crossed her legs, hands calmly folded. Good to be here, she said, voice steady. Maher gave a tight smile. Let's start simple. Why do so many progressives these days feel the need to moralize everything? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she blinked slowly and gave a slight nod, like she'd been expecting this exact line. But what happened next wasn't anger. It was something else. Something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous to anyone who thought they could handle her. Jasmine leaned forward just slightly, not enough to signal confrontation, but just enough to take up space. She kept her voice light. Moralizing, huh? I think you mean standing up for people who don't usually get heard. Maher smirked. Right. But don't you think that sometimes passion gets in the way of governing? There's a lot of yelling, not a lot of results. It's like everyone's trying to go viral instead of get things done. A couple people in the audience chuckled again. That kind of polite, awkward laugh you hear when no one's quite sure if it's a joke or a jab. Jasmine didn't smile. I get it, she said calmly. Young people, especially young women, especially young black women, get labeled emotional when we care too much, or angry when we speak directly. Meanwhile, someone else can lose their temper, curse on air, and it's passion. Interesting, isn't it? Maher shifted in his seat. You're making this about identity. I'm talking about approach. People want solutions, not lectures. And I'm telling you, Jasmine replied, that you can't separate identity from approach. If someone spends their life watching their communities get overlooked, underfunded, and blamed for problems they didn't create, what do you expect them to sound like when they finally get the mic? Soft? The tension thickened. The audience quieted. Not out of discomfort, but anticipation. Maher raised an eyebrow. But isn't that the problem? The mic's become a weapon instead of a tool. Every moment's a chance to clap back. I mean, it's almost like Congress is a stage now. Jasmine chuckled, not because it was funny, but because the setup was too easy. You know what's wild? She said. It has always been a stage. You just never noticed when the same people were writing every act. Now that someone new is reading from the script, suddenly it's performative? Someone in the crowd said, "Whoa," under their breath. Others began nodding. The camera didn't cut away. It lingered on Maher's face. He reached for his water. Okay, so let's take the emotion out of it. Policy-wise, what's actually being done? That depends, Jasmine said. Do you mean what's being proposed or what's being blocked? He tilted his head. Explain. She did. Let's take voting rights. I helped draft language that would have made it easier for working people to vote. More polling places, stronger mail-in options, protections for people with disabilities. That's not emotional. That's structural. But every time we bring it up, someone accuses us of overreaching. So I'm asking, who's really holding progress back? Maher shrugged. Maybe it's just not that simple. No, she said plainly. It is that simple. What's complicated is trying to justify keeping systems that work for some people while pretending they work for everyone. The audience began to murmur. This wasn't the standard exchange they were used to. No punchlines, no forced laughs. Just two people circling something deeper, and only one of them looked comfortable in it. Maher crossed one leg over the other and gave a tight smile. Sounds like a good soundbite. Jasmine didn't blink. Maybe, or maybe it just sounds different because I didn't need to raise my voice to make the point. But Maher wasn't done, and Jasmine knew it. What came next wasn't a question. It was a swing. Maher leaned back in his chair, the smile slipping into something colder, calculated. His fingers tapped the armrest once, then again. Well, he said slowly, you talk a lot about how hard it is for women like you, but isn't part of leadership being able to take criticism without calling it oppression? The sentence landed heavy, not because it was loud, not because it was clever, but because it carried that smug undercurrent that said, you're not allowed to call this what it is. For a moment, Jasmine didn't respond. She looked at him, really looked. Not like a sparring partner, like a man who was asking a question he already thought he had the answer to. Then she turned slightly toward the audience, not in a grand, theatrical way, just enough to acknowledge them. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink more than usual. But her voice, it changed. It slowed down, sharpened. Let me ask you something, she said quietly. If I sit here and explain why certain systems push people to the margins, and your first instinct is to say I'm playing victim, what does that say about how you listen? Silence. Real silence. No coughs, no whispers, no chuckles. She kept going. I'm not oppressed because someone disagrees with me. I'm pointing out a pattern, and the moment I name that pattern, suddenly the conversation shifts to whether I'm being too sensitive, not whether the pattern exists. That's not debate. That's deflection. The camera cut to Maher. His expression faltered. Not much, just a flicker, but enough. That small sliver of time where someone realizes they might not be as in control of the narrative as they thought. Jasmine stayed steady. And let's be real, she continued. You've built a career saying the uncomfortable thing. You pride yourself on pushing back against the mainstream. But when a black woman does the same thing, when she challenges you directly, you don't call it brave. You call it emotional. A woman in the audience clapped, then another, then half the room. Maher lifted his hand, trying to wave them down with a smirk that didn't quite land. All right. Let's keep it civil. Jasmine turned back to him, calm as ever. I am being civil, she said. I'm just not being small. That line cracked the air. It wasn't delivered with fire. It didn't need it. That's what made it hit harder. It was the truth behind it, the years packed into that one sentence, the restraint, the sharpness. It wasn't just a response. It was a correction, a boundary, freshly drawn. Even Maher couldn't spin that one. For a beat, he sat back and let out a short breath, part scoff, part surrender. He tried to recover, reaching for his notes, but his hands moved just a little faster than before, like he'd lost rhythm, and the crowd knew it. Not because they were on Jasmine's side, but because, for once, the story in front of them wasn't being filtered through sarcasm or spectacle. It was two worlds clashing, and the quieter one was winning. Jasmine didn't push further. She didn't need to. She sat back, adjusted her blazer slightly, and waited for the next question. But the real shift wasn't what she said. It was what happened next, when the show ended and the world started talking. The credits had barely finished rolling when Reese rushed into the dressing room with wide eyes and Jasmine's phone in his hand. You're trending. Jasmine raised an eyebrow as she peeled off her microphone. Already? Number 2 on X. And climbing. She took the phone from him. Mentions were flooding in. Some were screenshots. Others were clips, just 15 seconds long, showing that one moment. I'm not being small. It was looping, edited into GIFs, memes, overlaid with dramatic music, typed out in white, bold font under the words, "Say that again." She exhaled through her nose. They're going to twist it. They already are, Reese replied. But you should see the comments. People are eating it up. Like, this isn't just political Twitter, it's everyone. The producers didn't come in to say goodbye. There was no post-show handshake, no follow-up thanks, just the usual assistant with a quick, "You're clear," before walking away. That was fine. Jasmine wasn't looking for a post-mortem. On the drive back to the hotel, her inbox filled with messages from staffers, journalists, and friends from back home in Dallas. Some were proud. Some were in awe. Others just said, "Damn." Her mother texted, "You were raised right. That man thought he had you figured out. He didn't." But the praise wasn't the only thing buzzing. By the time she got to the hotel elevator, a headline had already gone live. Congresswoman Crockett lashes out at Bill Maher in on-air clash. She stared at it, shook her head once, then handed the phone back to Reese. "Lashes out," she muttered. "Every time a woman sets a boundary, it's violence." Reese didn't say anything. He just pressed the elevator button and looked down. Upstairs, Jasmine finally took off her heels. The quiet of the hotel room felt heavy but familiar. She flipped on the muted news, only to see her own face on the screen, talking without sound. A panel of talking heads debated whether she went too far. One of them said, "This is why Democrats struggle. They alienate people with this tone." Another countered, "She didn't raise her voice once. She was surgical." Jasmine didn't listen long. She sat down, rubbed the arch of her foot, and reached for the remote. But just as she was about to power the TV off, her phone vibrated again. This time, a call. Unknown number, Washington, D.C. area code. She let it ring twice before answering. "This is Jasmine." A male voice on the line, calm, controlled. "Congresswoman Crockett? This is Ed Ramos at CNN. We'd love to have you on tomorrow morning for a segment, just to follow up on your appearance tonight." She didn't respond right away. "I'll have my team get back to you," she said eventually. "Thanks." After she hung up, Reese asked, "You want me to say no?" Jasmine leaned back in the chair, looking at the darkened city outside. "I want you to say we'll think about it." Because that was the truth. She didn't need to rush into another mic, another headline, another table of people waiting to misread her on purpose. She wasn't running from it. She just didn't want to be a moment. Not when she was building a movement. Across social media, people were quoting her, not with hashtags or slogans, but with something deeper. Some wrote about their own workplaces, how they'd been told to smile more, talk less, not take things so personally. Others shared how they were raising their daughters to speak without apology. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was personal. Jasmine scrolled through a few more posts, most anonymous, some not. One stood out, a selfie of a high school girl from Columbus, Ohio, holding up a sticky note with Jasmine's quote written in Sharpie. "I'm not being small." But the wave that was building around her didn't stop at applause. By morning, the backlash was coming, and it was louder than ever. By 7 a.m., the headlines had multiplied. The word "clapback" was in half of them. Fiery exchange. Congresswoman torches Maher. The usual flair of digital sensationalism. But underneath it all was something more telling. The split. Cable news panels picked it up. Morning radio weighed in. Podcasts released emergency episodes. Some called her brave, others divisive. One conservative host compared her to an activist in a suit, as if that was supposed to be an insult. Back in Dallas, Jasmine sat at her kitchen counter, the smell of reheated coffee filling the room while the news droned on in the background. She hadn't slept much, not because she was anxious, but because she knew exactly what the next 48 hours would bring. Reese sat across from her, eyes glued to his laptop. "There's at least 20 new interview requests," he said. "NPR, MSNBC, some independent outlets. Even that guy from The Viewpoint wants you. Skip him." "I already did." She looked out the window. The sun was just beginning to push through the clouds, throwing faint light across the tops of houses in her neighborhood. It was quiet here, real quiet. Do they want to talk policy? She asked. Reese hesitated. Mostly they want a reaction. Of course they do, she muttered. It wasn't that Jasmine didn't understand media. She did. Probably too well. It just bothered her that a single moment, one that came after a string of interruptions, deflections, and subtle dismissals, was now being distilled down to a viral clip. A man from the Capitol called her office directly that afternoon, said he respected the spirit of her words, but warned her that the press doesn't always treat these moments kindly. Translation: you made them uncomfortable. Don't do it again. But Jasmine wasn't flinching. She'd known the risks before she walked into that studio. What she hadn't expected was the way some of her own colleagues would respond. An older congressman, someone she'd once respected, tweeted something about decorum and unity without naming her, but everyone knew who it was aimed at. A few moderate pundits called for more restraint on both sides, as if speaking plainly was somehow equivalent to being dismissive on national television. Jasmine didn't fire back. She didn't quote tweet, and she didn't go live on Instagram. She stayed quiet on purpose. Instead, she met with her staff. She made a few phone calls to grassroots leaders she trusted. She spoke to a group of high schoolers in Garland over Zoom and thanked them when one girl said, "I felt seen." That was the part no one put in the headlines. No one talked about how much restraint it took to not shout, to not cut someone off, to sit there, measured, and push back without ever raising your voice. People didn't realize that sometimes not reacting takes more strength than going off. Still, it gnawed at her. How quickly people wanted her moment reduced to a meme, a savage comeback, instead of what it actually was, a deliberate act of self-respect. Later that evening, she found herself sitting at her desk alone. The laptop screen lit her face. Emails, statements, interview prep. It could wait. She opened her journal, just a black notebook with a worn leather cover. She wrote 5 words. Not loud, just clear. Enough. Then she closed the book. She wasn't chasing the camera. She wasn't looking for applause. But she also wasn't going to sit quietly while someone else decided how she was supposed to show up. But the weight of that choice, that line she drew, would follow her long after the trending hashtags faded. A week passed. The internet had moved on to the next controversy. A celebrity divorce, a leaked video, another political scandal brewing in Ohio. Jasmine's clips still floated around, shared here and there, usually with a line like, "This is how you do it." But the noise had thinned. Jasmine didn't mind. She didn't crave noise. What stuck with her were the conversations that happened after. Quiet ones, real ones. Like the woman in her district, mid-50s, worked in admin at a public school, who pulled Jasmine aside at a town hall in Mesquite and whispered, "I've sat in meetings where men spoke over me for years. You said the thing I never could." She smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I just wish I'd said it sooner." Or the retired pastor from Longview who called her office and left a voicemail. "I didn't agree with you, but I respected how you carried yourself. That's how grown folks should talk. Keep speaking plain." It was these moments, these pieces of quiet honesty, that grounded Jasmine more than any headline ever could. But they also reminded her why what happened on that stage mattered. It wasn't just about clapping back. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about setting a standard. There's a pressure that comes with being in her position. Not just as a politician, but as a black woman in rooms where decisions are made before you speak and judged harder after you do. People like to say, just focus on policy. But when your identity is treated like a distraction, neutrality becomes a luxury you can't afford. She thought about that as she spoke to a group of interns visiting from smaller Texas colleges. They sat around a long conference table, notebooks open, eyes wide. One of them, a young man from Lubbock, asked, "How do you decide when to speak up and when to stay quiet?" Jasmine leaned back in her chair. "You don't wait for the moment to feel safe," she said. "You speak when the silence feels heavier than the risk." They wrote that down. Another intern asked, "How do you not get angry when people talk down to you?" She smiled. "I do get angry, but I learned that anger doesn't have to be loud to be real. You don't always need volume to hold power." That wasn't something she'd read in a book. That was earned. That came from rooms where her tone was picked apart more than her ideas, from moments when she wanted to explode, but chose not to. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew the impact of stillness. After the meeting, one of the interns lingered behind, A girl, nervous hands. She said, "I want to run for office one day, but I don't think people will take me seriously. I talk fast. I get emotional. People say I care too much." Jasmine looked at her, full of something gentle and steady. "Keep caring," she said. "That's the part they're scared of." They stood in silence for a second before the girl smiled and walked out, scribbling in her notebook. Jasmine stood at the window after they left, looking down at the slow movement of cars below. Everything felt noisy out there, but in here, in this exact moment, it felt clear. She knew her words on Maher's show had traveled far, but what mattered more was where they landed. Because that line, "I'm not being small," wasn't just for a viral moment. It was a reminder that strength isn't always loud, that clarity carries weight, that refusing to shrink is its own kind of power. But even with all that said, the story wasn't done, not until the people watching understood what it meant for them. There's a certain kind of silence that follows you after a public moment. It's not peace. It's not stillness. It's the silence that asks, "What now?" For Jasmine, that question didn't come with panic. It came with responsibility. Because the truth is, most people won't ever go on live television. They won't sit across from a host with millions watching. They won't get quoted or misquoted or turned into a trending hashtag. But they will find themselves in rooms where they're spoken over, in jobs where their competence is doubted the moment they speak, in conversations where someone smiles while making them smaller. That's where this story lives now, not in the clip, but in the reflection it stirred. A young teacher in Tulsa sent Jasmine a letter, handwritten, said she played the clip in her classroom. Not for the politics, but for the posture. "We talk a lot about bullying," the teacher wrote, "but we rarely teach what it looks like to stand up for yourself without striking back." A man in his 60s from rural Oregon wrote in too. "I didn't agree with you on much," he admitted, "but I saw how calm you were. I've never seen someone take a hit and respond without throwing one back. That stuck with me. That was the legacy of the moment." It wasn't that Jasmine Crockett won a debate. It was that she gave people something they didn't know they needed. Permission to be firm without being cruel, to take up space without apologizing, to correct without retaliating. In a culture obsessed with clapbacks and takedowns, that kind of presence is rare and powerful. And that's the deeper message. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to shrink to be accepted. And you don't owe anyone the version of yourself that makes them more comfortable at your expense. When Jasmine walked into that studio, she wasn't looking to go viral. She was there to talk about policy. But what she walked out with was something louder than any headline, a blueprint. For every woman who's ever been told she's too much, for every young person told they're not realistic, for every black voice told to calm down when all they did was speak clearly. This story is a reminder. You don't need permission to be whole. You don't need applause to be right. And you don't need to change your tone just to fit into someone else's comfort zone. So if you're watching this, wondering how this connects to you, ask yourself, where have you made yourself smaller just to survive a room? Where have you backed down? Not because you were wrong, but because you were afraid of being labeled. And more importantly, what would happen if you stopped doing that? What would happen if, the next time someone tried to define your worth by your delivery, you looked them straight in the eye and said, "I'm not being small"? Because the moment you do, everything shifts. People will feel it. Some will respect it. Some will resent it. But they won't forget it. And neither will you. So if this story meant something to you, share it. Send it to someone who needs that reminder. Speak the words out loud if you have to. And subscribe, because we tell stories like this that don't just inform, but reflect something real, something lived, the kind of truth you don't have to shout to believe in. Your voice matters, just the way it is.